Thank you, Jim, for that great talk. Next is Dr. John Dunn, the one and only.
Well, I can't tell you how tough it is to do this with this light on, because I'm an old guy, and next week I'm supposed to get my cataracts removed. But I can read this, which is what the slides are on that. I'm John Dunn. I practiced emergency medicine at Fort Hood for 14 years and retired in June because I couldn't hear the girls anymore. The girl residents, if they're in a room full of people with the fans going, were presenting patients, and I was going, would you repeat that, please? So I no longer am an emergency physician. I'm a retired Army emergency physician, and we'll have to leave it at that. But I do take care of the jail at the Brown County Jail in Brownwood, Texas. And I live on a 50-acre farm with 5 dogs and 2 horses, and as many deer as want to come up and eat corn. I'm going to talk to you about noble lies, which sounds like a pretentious title to a speech by a doctor from Brownwood, Texas, but I was educated by the Jesuits, so I have all kinds of pretensions myself, and I learned them from people who study the classics. So here we are talking about the noble lies, and I have to go to the next slide. The noble lie is told to promote social and societal accord. If you're an oligarch, what you need to do is keep the masses from getting upset about things. So you tell them lies so that they'll feel more comfortable about how things are taken care of. And you can understand how a noble lie becomes the tool of a totalitarian government. We hope that we don't have a totalitarian government, but we do have some people who promulgate noble lies who happen to work for the U.S. government. And there are 2 noble lies that are important. Environmentalism is loaded up with noble lies because they have an ideology that is determined on the basis of a sort of a faith. And those noble lies include the 2 subjects that are going to be the focus of what I talk about today. One is that they can demonstrate that small particulate air pollution by epidemiological studies is proven to kill hundreds of thousands of people in the United States annually. The other lie that they tell is that carbon dioxide will cause warming, and warming will kill people and cause great crisis across the planet. I would assert that neither one of those lies should be allowed to continue. So let's talk about some of the scaremongering. And this is a brief discussion of the book that will come out as soon as we can get finished with the drafts and get it cleaned up. It's the CCR2 book that's going to be a follow-up on the other climate change revisited books that have been published by the non-governmental Interplanetary Climate Change Committee. I'm not sure what NIPCC means on our side, but there are members of this group that's meeting today, and people who work for Heartland and with Heartland who have been participants in the creation of this book. And this chapter in particular, Craig Idso is here in the building. He may be here in the crowd. Stan Young was sitting right there. Stan was a helper in this book. Charles Badig is here. You might say that, well, how could you possibly be the lead author for a chapter of 130 pages and who knows how many hundreds of references? Well, it's because Craig Idso does all the hard work, and I take the credit. You notice that Enstrom is named there too, so we have a fairly good representation of what will be the chapter on human health effects that have to do with not just warming, because climate is the name of the book, also at my insistence and generally the agreement of the Heartland people, we're talking about EPA junk science in the area of air pollution research, because I think that's very important for us to deal with in our organization and in the efforts that we're making to try to push back on stupid regulations. These are just lists of the chapter headings, and I'm not intending to read them to you, so don't worry about that. And you'll see that it covers sort of systematically all the research that we did on warming and the health effects of warming, but also a pretty good chapter, or a pretty good part of the chapter on air pollution research, the problem with the bad epidemiology that's being used by the EPA that Jim has described here. And it has to do with doing small associations and making claims that allow them to make the projections that there are going to be hundreds of thousands of people who die every year. It's just not true. With regards to their claims about CO2 creating warming, which will create a catastrophic change in the planet that'll kill people, think about it. First of all, the warming isn't going to be what they say it is. But secondly, warming has always been better for people and the biosphere than cold. Cold and cooler is always worse. So that's the rest of that chapter. Now we have small enough print that I'm having a hard time reading it. Is this thing on? When you got cataracts, all kinds of bad things happen to you. So, is this lavalier mic on? Yep. Okay. I'm going to just walk down here so I can read it better. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, here we go. Direct benefits from fossil fuels. We know all the things, this is in the book. And what these are summaries of things that are in the book that announce the benefits that we've been talking about today and that we all know are a part of having fossil fuels and ultimately a lot of good, cheap energy. In addition to that, air quality, even though the US EPA claims that air pollution is a killer, it's not. The air, even when it was the worst in Los Angeles, was not killing people. It was irritating people. There's a world of difference in the practice of medicine between something that irritates you and something that asphyxiates you or destroys your lungs. So everybody was kind of sucked in by the idea, well, that air looks so ugly, you know, look at that Los Angeles basin. And that was always the picture that was shown. And it essentially got everybody going in the right direction. Well, let's see if we can clean up the air. And they called it the Clean Air Act. But it's the Safe Air Act if you look at the text of the bill and the law that was written. So, toxicology went to hell because linear no-threshold toxicology is not good toxicology. Toxins have thresholds, just like drugs have thresholds for what's good and what's bad. Too much of a good thing is toxic. So think about it that way. So mouse and rat studies aren't very good because we aren't mouse and rat people. And they also gave them sublethal dosage, what would require us to almost spend all day long eating the stuff that they were giving these mice and rats. In spite of efforts for two decades to get the data from EPA, we've been unable to get it, and that's the reason why Jim talked about it, the importance of finally getting the CPS data so they could redo the analysis and determine whether there really was even the small association that they claimed showed that people were dying from small particle air pollution. And one of the things Jim didn't mention that was on the slides, he didn't talk about it, but I assume that everybody is aware of the fact that when you show a small association and the confidence interval crosses 1.0, that means you have no effects shown. And if you saw what his list showed, you saw an awful lot of confidence intervals that crossed 1. So, I think I've already told you a little bit about why observational studies are not worthy of the kind of promotion that the EPA has been pushing, particularly when small associations are found. If you get 100% effect or more, which means that the relative risk is 2.0 or more, then you can start to talk about the fact that this population study might be a good hypothesis generating research. But if it's small, it doesn't mean anything. It could be in the range of noise, or confounders may be the reason for it appearing the way it did. And a pile of bad studies with small associations isn't any better than one. But a good study that shows no association can essentially refute what the pile shows. That's what the noble lie is about carbon dioxide. And I'm not going to try to talk about it any more than just to say this. Carbon dioxide is supposed to cause warming, which is going to cause a catastrophe. And I would rather be in a warm place than a cold place. And the research that we found shows that cardiovascular events, deaths, and respiratory illnesses, among other things, are always increased by cool or colder weather. So that in fact, when Gasparini in 2015 did a study of the whole planet, 384 locations, he found that cold and cooler weather caused a difference of 17 times more deaths than warm or hot. So it's worth knowing these things when you start hearing about how warm is going to cause the planet to have a fever and blow up. That's what the Gasparini study showed, okay? And there have been other studies that Craig Itso has gathered up in his archives on health, and we put in the chapter, that show around the world, and in all the countries of Asia, Europe, and elsewhere, there is a benefit to warming, there is a detriment to health for cooling or cold. A couple of other things about health. Vector diseases really aren't impacted that much by a little bit of a change in the temperature of the globe. The average temperature of the globe is not going to determine whether ticks can go a little farther or a little farther north or south. So vectors of all the vector diseases are a little more adjustable than you might think. For example, malaria was a serious problem in Finland at one time. Pretty chilly place. Leningrad was the place where the last serious malaria outbreak occurred in what we might call the advanced societies. So, a couple of things that I could say. First of all, air pollution, noble lie, I think we've taken care of that. Guidance on good science comes from the Federal Judicial Center's reference manual on scientific evidence. The chapters on toxicology, on epidemiology, restate what I've just told you. When you're doing epidemiology, you have to do it a certain way. You have to show enough of an effect in the experimental population to be able to make the claims that you're making. The EPA has never achieved that. All of these air pollution studies have relative risks of less than 10% effect. Less than 10% effect. That doesn't mean anything in epidemiology, because population studies are relatively uncontrolled, and it's very difficult to make sure that you eliminate the confounders and the noise. And speaking of noise, consider this. From day to day, you know that the death rate's going to be different. Doesn't that provide an opportunity for data dredging? If you're looking at the air pollution monitors and you're looking at the death rate in the studies, in the populations that you're looking at, wouldn't there be an opportunity to find a lag time that fits into a computer claim that you found an association? That's kind of scary stuff that they could manipulate like that, but that's what they do. Okay, so this is about relative risk. I've told you basically what it says there. The grade group is out of, actually, Macalester University in Canada is where it started. And they gave a basic rule in some of the papers they've tried to give the readers in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology some kind of information with regards to how to establish rules for quality of evidence. What they say is you rate it up if the association is strong, robust. Otherwise, you've got weak stuff. And what Jim has been talking about is stuff in the range where you have to say, it doesn't prove anything. Enstrom's already told you. The guy with the beard and the smile, Stan Young. That's him. Young, Smith, and Lopiano did what Steve Malloy set him up to do. Steve had done a study, a multi-year study in California, just looking at death certificates and trying to find out whether he could see any air pollution effect. Couldn't find it. So he said, I'm going to get one of these professional epidemiologists, and Stan is a statistician who went to the Holiday Inn Express and became an epidemiologist. Anyway, so he did the big study with Lopiano and Smith, and he found that in a big study, I mean, we're talking big study, multi-year, millions of deaths, no effect. No effect. Here we make the publicly available data set, and lo and behold, he looked at both PM 2.5 and ozone, and he looked at 2 million deaths, 37,000 exposure days, didn't find anything. What a disappointment to all those EPA people have been taking millions of dollars to do a pile of research that had small associations in it. Nothing can compare with the human exposure experiments. So Lisa Jackson, who was the executive, the administrator of the EPA, goes to the Congress, and she says in 2011, we think that the effect of small particulate air pollution is to kill about as many people as cancer in the United States. Well, cancer kills about a quarter of the people who die in the United States every year. So we're talking easily a few 100,000 people, because 2.5 million people die every year in the United States. So she was saying the small particles are killing 500,000 people maybe, and casually saying it, oh, she was in Congress. She was doing it when she was testifying. The same year, the same month, Steve Malloy showed me this thing. He said, what do you think of this experiment they're describing in this journal from the NIH? They put this lady who's 54 years old, obese and hypertensive, with a history of heart disease, in a chamber, and they exposed her to these small particles that are supposed to be killing hundreds of thousands of people every year. And then we found out 10 medical schools are doing that kind of research. And the question is, why couldn't they find something so they could at least make something out of this illegal and unethical activity? Because they weren't telling these people that they were telling the Congress that small particles are lethal. We went after them for a while. The National Academy of Sciences, their research arm called the National Research Council, gave them a pass. They said, here's what they said in their report. Well, small particles
John.
really aren't that lethal.
John.
Yeah,
John,
we're done?
You gotta wrap it up.
Okay. I can't see a card. I think I've covered the things that are the important things, and I've also produced a monograph for you so that you'll have an idea as to all these things that relate to the noble lie. And these are my conclusions, but I think you already know what they are. Thank you for your time.